She started engaging in activities that left Sabo perplexed. This new game was completely different from the ones he enjoyed with his friends at school. Sabo was just a young boy of 10, attending primary school. He found joy in playing football and immersing himself in storybooks. Yet, on most days, he came back to a house devoid of life, as his parents were perpetually occupied with their jobs. Mr. and Mrs. Abina operated a bustling shop in the heart of the local market. They toiled relentlessly each day to secure financial stability and provide Sabo with a fulfilling life. Every day, the school bus would deliver Sabo to his doorstep at around 3 in the afternoon. He found himself alone in the house until 6, when his mother returned from the market. He lamented one evening, expressing his deep sense of boredom while alone in this place. "Apologies, Sabo, it's only for 3 hours," his mother explained. "We must put in a lot of effort to cover your school fees and other necessities." Sabo grasped the situation, yet there were moments when he longed for more time dedicated to him. One day Mrs. Abina conceived a brilliant notion. "Sabo," she remarked, "how about we ask Auntie Nadia, our neighbor next door, to take care of you until we get back home?" Auntie Nadia, their neighbor, was a woman in her late 20s who resided by herself. She was unmarried, which indicated her single status. Her cheerful and kind nature earned the trust of Sabo's parents. "All right, Mom, Sabo is on board." He was quite familiar with Auntie Nadia. She was incredibly kind and frequently offered him little delights. With his approval, Sabo began to stay at Auntie Nadia's house each time he returned from school. Auntie Nadia's home was cozy yet tidy. She consistently welcomed Sabo with a dish of nourishment and a friendly grin. "Sabo, it's time to eat. How did school go today?" she frequently inquired. Initially, Sabo experienced a touch of shyness, but as time passed, her cheerful demeanor and delightful tales helped him ease into comfort. Auntie Nadia displayed remarkable kindness. She would purchase animated films and other entertaining children's films for Sabo to enjoy on her little television. In the end, she purchased a Game Boy video game for Sabo, and he adored it immensely. "Sabo, go for it," Auntie Nadia said softly, her warm smile lighting up the room as she handed him the toy for the first time. Sabo hesitated and felt shy about accepting it initially, but she was firm, saying, "Sabo, you are the younger brother I never had. I will obtain whatever you desire." Sabo expressed his heartfelt appreciation as he picked up the Game Boy. Yet, from that moment onwards, everything shifted. It all began on a Tuesday afternoon when Sabo came home from school. During his time with Auntie Nadia, she proposed introducing him to a new game. "This game is meant solely for the two of us, Sabo. Only she can play or know about it," she murmured gently, her voice barely above a whisper. However, Sabo lacked a true grasp of the game. Auntie Nadia opened his eyes to experiences and actions far beyond his years. She let his hand to navigate her form, leaving Sabo in a state of bewilderment. The sounds Auntie Nadia made and her expressions as she engaged in the so-called game only added to Sabo's confusion. Halfway through he cut in with, "Auntie, I don't like this game," his face shadowed by a troubled and distressed look. "There's no need for concern, Sabo." Auntie Nadia reassured him, saying that with time, he would come to enjoy this game. Gradually, the small secret game evolved into a daily ritual, one that Sabo loathed intensely. He was youthful, innocent, and rather gullible, never quite grasping the glimmer of thrill or joy that sparkled in Auntie Nadia's eyes during their so-called game. As time passed, Sabo began to feel a sense of unease about visiting Auntie Nadia's house. He will linger for many hours in school after the final bell before making his way home. On Fridays, when school lets out earlier than usual, he shuffles along the road, deliberately prolonging his journey home. After yet another game session with Auntie Nadia, Sabo found himself grappling with an intense urge to confide in his parents, though fear held him back. He found himself unable to articulate the source of his fear or the hesitation that kept him from sharing, yet an instinctual feeling lingered within him. As the evening unfolded, Sabo approached his mother, who was busy in the kitchen. "Mommy, I have something to share with you," he began softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "What is it, Sabo?" Mrs. Abina inquired, her impatience evident as she quickly pivoted away from the kitchen sink. "Mom, I need to talk to you about Auntie Nadia." Before he could proceed, Mrs. Abina interrupted his speech abruptly. Sabo, how often did I utter your name? She inquired, her expression tinged with irritation. Sabo, your dad and I put in a lot of effort and dedication to provide you with the best life possible. We may not always be present, but Auntie Nadia is stepping in to help us bridge that gap for the time being. Don't worry, you'll come to like her, and you two will become friends, Mrs. Abina said, gently patting her son on the head. But mommy, no excuses, Sabo. Mrs. Abina interrupted. Please return to your room and focus on your assignment. Let's not discuss this matter any further. With a heavy heart, Sabo responded, Yes, mommy, before turning and walking out of the kitchen. That night, as Sabo sat in his room, tears streamed down his face, a quiet testament to his solitude, for no one seemed willing to hear his voice. He was bewildered by Auntie Nadia's actions, and now it seemed that even his own parents were too busy for him. Yet, he remained unaware that his challenges were just beginning to unfold. The following morning, as Sabo stirred from his slumber, he discovered that he had wet the bed. Sabo felt a mix of shock and tension coursing through him. He had not wet the bed since he was a toddler, and moreover, he hadn't consumed an excessive amount of water the night before to justify it. Could this be a consequence of the game Auntie Nadia engages in with me? Sabo reflected as he looked back on the past. Even more troubling, he felt unable to confide in his parents for fear that his mother would punish him. She enforced rules with unwavering authority. In any case, Sabo successfully concealed the mattress and changed his attire before anyone else could catch on. However, the problem of bedwetting lingered and stretched on for several days. His parents were preoccupied, oblivious to the signs, yet Sabo sensed that something was amiss. After a long day at school, Sabo made his way to Auntie Nadia's house, just like he always did. Auntie Nadia welcomed him warmly, presenting a plate of rice and a glass of juice. Eventually, when Auntie Nadia arrived to engage in her usual game with Sabo, he promptly interjected, saying, Auntie, I don't enjoy your game. It's causing me to wet my bed daily. I believe I'm not feeling well. Auntie Nadia's demeanor shifted in an instant. For a moment, she appeared to be lost in contemplation, grappling with the meaning of what she had just heard. Then suddenly she wore a gentle smile, stepped closer to Sabo with a sense of reassurance and said, Don't worry, Sabo, you will be completely fine. It is quite common for boys at your age to experience bedwetting. You will move past this. However, this offered no solace to Sabo whatsoever. He found it difficult to articulate all that was unfolding. Ever since he began this new game with Auntie Nadia, an unusual wave of anxiety washed over him the moment he entered her house. His heart raced more than normal, and he could sense the rhythm pulsing from his chest. He longed for his parents to return home from work earlier, hoping to escape the weight of his current experiences. Before long, this began to impact his focus in class. Sabo, once a standout student in class, found it increasingly difficult to focus on his studies. He had lost the joy he once found in playing. As his friends frolicked on the school field during break, Sabo found himself in a secluded corner, enveloped in his own thoughts, the vivid memories of Auntie Nadia's body swirling in his mind. His class teacher quickly observed this newly discovered behavior from Sabo. Mrs. Zara was a warm and approachable teacher. Every student and pupil adored her for her playful spirit and her generous heart. Yet, one remarkable talent Mrs. Zara possessed was her keen ability to observe. Mrs. Zara had a keen intuition for sensing when a student was down or simply experiencing a shift in their emotions. This unique quality of hers allowed her to connect effortlessly with the students. Mrs. Zara had been watching Sabo for some time, and was acutely aware that something was amiss. He was once a cheerful, affectionate, and spirited young lad. At that moment, he appeared largely lost in thought and melancholic. After a day of teaching in class, she requested Sabo to stay behind and meet her at her desk. Sabo, is there something wrong? It seems like you've been a bit adrift lately. Sabo stood before her desk, his head lowered in a deep sense of shame. He found himself pondering the decision of whether to confide in Mrs. Zara. He attempted to express himself, yet the words weighed too heavily for him to share. No, Ma, everything is fine, Sabo said after a few uncomfortable pauses. Sabo, Mrs. Zara began, if you're dealing with any personal struggles, don't hesitate to open up to me. I am your instructor. I am here to assist you in various ways, including education. In the end, she let Sabo go, yet Auntie Zara remained skeptical. She had indeed verified that Sabo was concealing something excessively large. He was afraid to open up. As Sabo made his way home that day, he silently hoped his parents would be back, wishing to avoid a visit to Auntie Nadia's house. Yet, unfortunately, nothing had changed. He spent time at Auntie Nadia's house, where she engaged in her usual game. However, an unusual occurrence took place this time. While engaged in her game, Sabo observed that his genital organ became firm and stood upright. A wave of dread washed over him, and he vowed to confide in Auntie Zara the following day. The following day at school, after the lesson concluded, he approached Auntie Zawadi's desk with his head lowered in shame and started, "Auntie, I have something to share with you." Auntie Zawadi leaned in, her expression serious yet reassuring, as she focused intently on the conversation. Sabo scanned his surroundings, glancing left and right, making sure no one was lurking nearby who might catch wind of what he was about to reveal. He leaned in closer to Mrs. Zara, his voice dropping to a whisper as he spoke softly in her ear. "Auntie Nadia is our neighbor at home. She has a way of influencing me, compelling me to act in ways that are beyond my understanding." Auntie Zawadi was taken aback. She listened intently as Sabo shared his story. "Sabo, your achievements are commendable." Auntie Zawadi began with an expression full of optimism. "There's no need for you to feel down, my boy. No one should have to endure the hardships you've faced at the hands of Auntie Nadia. Rest assured, I will exert every effort to assist you." After weeks of silence, a wave of happiness washed over Sabo as he realized that someone had truly heard him and was ready to lend a hand. Conversely, he felt a sense of fear as he was uncertain about how Auntie Nadia would respond upon discovering the truth. Auntie Zawadi swiftly convened a meeting with the headmistress and several members of the school board, and they all concurred that the issue was indeed serious and required immediate attention. The school administration called upon Mr. and Mrs. Abina to come to the school the following day to discuss the recent developments concerning Sabo. Did Sabo encounter any issues? Mrs. Abina inquired with a sense of urgency as she occupied a chair in the headmistress's office, her impatience evident. "Noma, kindly take your seat," the headmistress declared with a grave tone, guiding them into her office. "What we are about to discuss is even far worse. Mr. and Mrs. Sabo, your son has shared with us some unfortunate news regarding your neighbor, Auntie Nadia. Sabo mentioned that Auntie Nadia interacts with him daily. Have you heard about this?" "Excuse me, Mr. Abina boomed. With a tight fist, he rose swiftly from his chair. Mrs. Abina was utterly astonished. Mrs. Zawadi, who was also there, recounted the entire experience to them just as Sabo had described it. After considerable thought and persuasion, Mr. Abina ultimately decided against taking matters into his own hands and chose instead to engage the appropriate agencies responsible for addressing such crimes. As the school day came to an end, Mrs. Abina arrived at the school to personally collect Sabo and escort him home. "Sabo, I sincerely apologize for not being present when you needed to share your challenges with me. I became so engrossed in my tasks that I neglected to notice my own family. Rest assured, your dad and I have everything under control. You will feel confident again," she said, a tear tracing its way down her cheek. That evening, Auntie Nadia heard a loud, forceful knock on her door. As she approached to see who was at the door, she was confronted by the stern expressions of 3 policemen clad in black, their guns at the ready. They were law enforcement officials. Mr. Abina returned, flanked by police escorts and joined by Mrs. Zawadi and the school headmistress. "Miss Nadia, you are being placed under arrest for the crime of child molestation," one of the officers announced. "It seems there has been a misunderstanding." Auntie Nadia stood frozen, a mix of fear, confusion and shock washing over her as she declared, "You are in the wrong house. It would be wise to hold your tongue, as anything you express or undertake could be turned against you in a legal setting." The same officers with handcuffs intervened as they took Auntie Nadia into custody, securing her wrists with cuffs. In the meantime, Sabo found himself gripped by fear, hesitant to step outside. He lingered in his room, observing the entire event as it unfolded outside his window. He let out a deep breath of relief as he observed Auntie Nadia being placed in the police van and escorted out of the compound. From that day forward, Sabo's parents began to focus more on him. Each day they alternated picking him up from school and spending time with him at home. Auntie Zawadi closely monitored him at school, encouraging him and his peers to voice their concerns whenever they faced difficulties or required assistance from adults. However, the bedwetting has not ceased just yet. The therapist Sabo had been seeing reassured his parents that, with time, he would gradually overcome the trauma and begin to heal. Hello everyone. I appreciate you taking the time to engage with this narrative. Looking for a huge acknowledgement in our upcoming release. Please share your thoughts on a lesson you gained from the story and the country you are observing us from. Heartfelt gratitude to each and every one of you.